This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. Laura Walker McDonald is the Chief Executive Officer of the Social Impact Lab Foundation, or SIMlab, an organization that designs, implements, and measures the impact of inclusive technology projects and explores new ways that technology can facilitate and simplify project objectives. Before joining SIMlab, Laura worked for the British Red Cross on international humanitarian policy and learning, focused on quality and accountability, innovation, urbanization, cash transfer programming, and civil-military relations, as well as strategic planning. Drawing on her expertise in humanitarian aid, human rights law, and international development, she brings a cross-disciplinary approach to communications, innovation, and information management. I spoke with Laura in Washington, D.C. Hi there, Laura. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
You are so welcome.
Where are you sitting today?
So I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C. I'm in our co-working space, the OpenGov Hub.
Oh, you're in the OpenGov Hub. Great. Yeah, we've interviewed a couple of people from OpenGov Hub. And we're talking on April 28th. Spring has sprung, I understand, in D.C. It's almost actually probably unbearably hot now.
It's actually been very cold. Everyone is very sad about this and getting pictures from the West Coast that are much warmer. But somehow it is still allergy season, so we have an interesting mix going on here.
Love it. Laura, you are the CEO of SIMlab. I would like to have you tell us a story about not only what SIMlab is, but let's just start there. Tell us about what SIMlab is, and then we'll talk about how you got there.
Well, we're still kind of figuring out, how to say this, but essentially we work on helping people and organizations to use what we've kind of grouped together as inclusive technologies to reach people in their work, usually in development or aid work. And inclusive technologies for us are everything that is really cheap and easy to access and available to most people in the context that you're in. So here in the OpenGov Hub, I think Twitter would be a very appropriate inclusive technology. Most people here are on Twitter, and if I sent out an alert that there was bagels in the kitchen on email or Twitter, it would get to everybody. But outside on the street, that's not really the same situation. So you have to look at everybody who's on the street. And if you wanted to get a message to everybody on Vermont Avenue where we are, what is the technology that would reach the most people? Is it a text message? Is it a sign? Is it somebody walking up and down with a loudhailer? Would that be the best way to get everybody? And also, how would you hear from everybody? So if we wanted to have a street party or something, how would we make sure that we got everybody's feedback? So we take that kind of thinking and apply it to how you can make sure that you're getting feedback on, say, for example, we were just talking before about the Nepal response. How can the international aid community get feedback from the people that they're working with about what they need and what they think of the response? Or how can you make sure that you can, as a journalist in sub-Saharan Africa, how can you make sure you're hearing from as many people as possible about what they think is about what's going on? So that's what we do. And how we got here is through the sort of the history and the story of Frontline SMS, which I know you guys heard about a few weeks ago when you spoke to Sean McDonald.
You've now characterized SIMlab as we're still trying to, we're still characterizing our strategy. We're still putting together. How old SIMlab? Is this your creation? Is this your brainchild or?
Yes and no. I don't think of myself as a founder because SIMlab is the nonprofit, the registered U.S. charity that until December the 1st last year housed the Frontline SMS project. So the organization was set up because, as every flourishing aidpreneur will know, you have to have an institutional home for all your many donations and grant funding that comes through. And this was the NGO that was set up by our founder, Ken Banks, in 2007 to house the Frontline SMS project and the funding that it was starting to get. And Sean and I came in 2010, and we've been working on trying to, apply Frontline SMS, but also trying to ensure a sustainable future for the project. And as you will have heard, what we've decided to do is turn Frontline SMS into its own social enterprise that can really focus on being a great product. And so that left SIMlab having basically watched its kids kind of pack up and go off to college. And
I like that. That's
and
great.
Looking around the house going, well, now what? And we really did think, do we still need to be here? I mean, should we all just go off and write our books now? Like, what's the next move? The mission of the foundation, as I inherited it, and essentially still the ethos, is to lower barriers to using mobile in social change. And so we asked ourselves, are there still barriers? And we filled a whole wall with Post-its at our team meeting in July of all the barriers that we think still exist, why people find it hard to use mobile in their change work, and what are some of the environmental and institutional barriers, what type of funding you get, the way people think about this technology, basic industry stuff about how mobile itself is structured and configured right down to the company level and state regulation and things like that. So we came up with all these things and thought, there is really a role for someone to help people to overcome some of these challenges very directly in their work by working with them on projects, try and distill as much of that learning and learning from other projects as possible and turn it into actionable knowledge that everybody can use across sectors and globally. So we work not only in sort of human rights and more political sort of civic tech, governance and transparency stuff, but also on agriculture and health and humanitarian aid. And so we work across the spectrum to try and distill some of that, what is coming out as lessons learned, into the next thing, which is really stuff that people just know when they go to work. They know what they've got to do. They know that they need to think about gender. They know that they need to think about monitoring impact. And then also to try and put some of these ideas out in the world to try and reach people like donors, people like governments, and people coming into the industry as well who might be interested to learn sort of where we've been on this journey. Frontline SMS is 10 years old this year, so we've really seen mobile for development, which is commonly known as M4D, really sort of grow and change and come to a real point of asking itself, how can we do this better? And that's really what SIMlab is trying to do. So it's a combination of direct work to draw up learning and case studies and trying to put some of those ideas out through sort of blogs and public speaking and things like that.
You said that you started this off. I think this is amazing. I don't think we've ever actually had someone like you on the show who is inheriting an organization, and you're in the middle of evolution, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is something that is a classic, I think, aidpreneur problem, in that, we start an organization, we see an issue, and we start to address it. If we're successful, or we're lucky enough to be successful, things continue to grow, and we find ourselves a little scattered, and then, oh gosh, we should probably spin off or focus or these kinds of things. You're in that place now.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me in your head, you wake up every day, what are the top 5 of those Post-it notes that you put on the board of these barriers? What do you wake up sweating about every day?
I should send you a picture of my desk at the Open Gov Hub because they have glass barriers in the middle and I have Post-it notes.
Apparently you manage by Post-it note. I love it.
Yeah, I'm a pretty obsessive maker of lists, or specifically one list. I have a to-do list, and everybody knows that if they don't see me write it down, it's not going to happen when I commit to something. So, yeah, I do a little bit, but I also think anybody who's ever worked in Agile software development, so I ran Frontline's software team for a couple of years, and you just, Agile never leaves you, and you sometimes do find the idea of writing a task on a Post-it note and moving it along as you progress with it very comforting.
Give me, at the risk of being a complete wonk for 3 minutes,
yeah.
There are, a bunch of people who are listening to this show who've never heard the words Agile software development. What does that mean?
Oh, well, you should go and Google it because it's actually become a really useful way to manage project management too. So it's a nice thing to learn about. And if you ever end up working with developers, it's useful to know what they mean. I think if I put it in project management terms, it's the easiest way. We've all run projects where you spend ages planning and planning and planning and planning. And then you have this perfectly executed plan and a perfectly designed plan, and you start executing it and you realize that you need to change it. But you've spent sort of, several months planning, and now you're in execution mode, and it's really hard to change because the whole thing is set in stone. That's what in development terms would be called a waterfall approach. So the water runs along and then suddenly all plunges down into execution mode. Agile is more like a water wheel or something. I don't know, maybe that metaphor fell down somewhere in there, but it's more like you go along and you say, okay, we want to do something that's roughly this idea. So we want to have our street party on Vermont Avenue. So what we'll do is we'll think, what's the most important thing about this street party? We need probably a date, we need a time, and we probably need to I don't know, let the authorities know or something. So we'll just do those 3 things first off and just get those out. And while we're doing those 3 things, which are the most important things, we'll be thinking about what are the next 3 things we want to do. And as we're doing it, we're going out and saying to everybody on Vermont Avenue, hey, we've done these things. We've booked this date. Is that okay? We've spoken to the DC the city of DC. Is that okay? And this is the project as it's taking shape. And you do this kind of what they call user acceptance all the time. So this is it. Let's go back to software. So, all right, we've built these 3 things. Are these 3 things, do they look like what you think they should look like? Does that make sense to you? Is this what you want? Okay, what are the next 5 things you want? So you're always kind of 2 or 3 steps ahead in that process, drawing up high-level tasks and building them and checking them. And you have those 3 things going all the time so that, 1, you deliver some software earlier so people can be using and testing the software for longer, even if it's not finished. And 2, your users are actively shaping the direction that your software is going in. So, yeah, and a lot of it is all about the Post-its. We actually have had a habit of packing Post-its in our suitcases for many years to take to Nairobi where the dev team are, because it's hard to get really sticky Post-its in Kenya.
I love that. I love that there's a bottleneck of availability of Post-its there.
It's very true.
So before we circle back to the top 5 barriers that you had on that wall, one more level down on this. How hard has it been for you in the development and aid world to have Agile understood and accepted? And full disclosure, I've done a lot of work with the UN. I've done a lot of work with governments. And these are organizations that are built for bureaucracy. They are built for stability. Agile doesn't necessarily fit hand in glove with the way that they need to work for their appropriation cycles, et cetera. Tell us about any challenges that you've had there.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had that experience. I mean, a few high-level sort of thoughts. One is that, that is a thing. So they would say, how much is it going to cost to build this thing? And we say, we kind of either want to know more than they know yet, but still want a fixed cost. They still want a fixed cost from us, and we're worried about confirming, the fixed cost. I think one truism software development is you can either have a fixed delivery date or a fixed product set, but feature set, but you can't have both. So that's definitely a bit of a challenge. I think, though, the other thing is that there is a broad kind of difference in the whole ethos and the backgrounds of these 2 communities, the technology community, particularly the kind of open source, hacker, internet-friendly kind of digital volunteers that we're seeing. And I've seen this very pronouncedly in aid work, in humanitarian aid work, versus the very, particularly in aid work, very hierarchical sort of industry that has its roots in actually auxiliary service to armed forces. If you're thinking about the Red Cross societies. And so, they have this very hierarchical kind of... And I
often remind people they're called non-governmental organizations for a reason. I mean, they emulate the government, right?
They emulate the government, but I think they're about delivery. They are about getting out and you write the protocols ahead of time. Something happens, you go deliver on the protocols. And of course, there is flexibility within that. But then you've got this open source kind of there is no leader community of people who do things on their own terms, but for free. And I think it's a very different background. And I have seen some interesting moments where, for example, a useful in the sort of aid policy community, you would feed into a document as it's being written. You would be interviewed. If you were lucky, you might get a proof to comment on, and you'd prepare your organizational comments and you'd submit those to the people who were writing it, and they would choose to either take your comments or not. But once it was out, that was pretty much, you had your opportunity at consultation stage. Well, in the aid community on the internet, the kind of aid blogger kind of, and certainly the kind of digital volunteer type community, it's all blog posts. And what you see often in blog posts is call and response. So someone will say, this is what I think, and someone else will write a response blog, and then they might trade a couple, or it might all happen in the comments, but it's real time, even to the point where you'll see people amend their blog posts to reflect input that's come in from their readership. And so I have seen at least one instance where a report came out from a major body that had interviewed a lot of these people. Someone instantly wrote a stinging takedown blog post, and the body didn't do anything because they didn't understand that probably the thing to do would have been to, if you couldn't amend the report, then put out a blog post explaining, sort of giving your side. And it's not really rancorous, the blog posts. It's just the way that people communicate. So very often SIMlab sits in between these communities, in between one sector and another, or in between the techies and the non-techies. Because we're largely, nobody on the SIMlab staff started in the technical world. We all came from the development or aid or governance and transparency or legal world. And so we end up, translating. And I think that is something that I think is actually on my LinkedIn profile as something that I think is something that I see as a commonality throughout my career.
So take us back to those Post-its. What were when you wake up in the morning, you're like, you've created your strategy around inclusive technologies. What were the top 3, 4, 5 barriers that you put up on the wall that day that you said, these keep you up at night?
There are 2 sets, right? If you run an organization, there's what I sometimes think of as the above the line deliverable things that are your priorities, and then there are the below the line kind of enabling things that let you all function as an organization. And the bad thing about being the CEO is that both of them are your problem. And it's very, very easy to spend most of your time below the line because it can be all consuming. It's great to have your own organization, but you can end up spending a lot of time on the operations side of things. So actually, when I talk to people who are thinking about setting up their own thing, that's my cautionary tale, is like, great, enjoy, but look forward to spending a lot of time on tax returns and things like that. So the above the line things, though, it's still an evolving thing. We deliberately took this year so we split Frontline spun out on the 1st of December, and we deliberately took 2015 as a year to kind of do some quick and dirty pieces of work on 3 big things that we thought were important and see where they went, talk to donors, talk to our community, talk to our partners and users and people who also think like we do, and find out what people think is useful and see where there is more to do. And in the meantime, think about what else there is to do. So we wanted to really try some things, do some things that we thought might be useful, and then see where we went. So the 3 things are trying to improve the way, and this is in addition to all our implementation support work, trying to improve the way that the ICT for development or mobile for development sectors, insofar as they are sectors, do their monitoring and evaluation. And for those of your listeners who aren't sort of in the development world yet or the aid world, monitoring and evaluation is one of these has historically been one of these boring sort of silos where there's a team of very quiet people who do this, and everybody kind of averts their eyes when they walk past because it's the M&E guys. And it's like this black art. Really what it is it's somewhere between real-time monitoring of what you're doing to see if, like I was saying, in an agile way, to see if it's working, and actually being able to draw the line between what you did and what happened in the real world. And also in the longer term, being able to draw out the things that you did were particularly important and point other people to them and say, we think that really, really important to our success or failure in this project was that we did great community consultation, or we missed a section of the community when we did something like that. So we're working on a reusable sort of framework and toolkit for other organizations to pick up for how to do really good monitoring and evaluation of how technology contributes to development outcomes or aid outcomes. So that's one. Another one is ethics of data. So when you are, if you're in an organization that is doing an SMS feedback mechanism or something like that, congratulations, you are now a digital data holder, and you may well have some of those data sets on your hard drive or on a USB stick somewhere. How do you explain to the people that you're working with what you're doing with their information? How do you responsibly and legally handle it? How do you formulate your whole thinking around what kind of a data holder you're going to be? And this is way beyond what many aid agencies are thinking about in terms of, for example, very simple example, when do you delete data that you hold? Many agencies just hold it indefinitely, but actually responsibly, you should collect, maybe many people think, as little as possible and then delete it. So what did I say? M&E, ethics of data. I'm struggling to think of what the third one is. Oh, yes, learning. So the other thing that I think is a real challenge for the community is that learning piece. So when we do a program in international aid and development, you tend to do an evaluation at the end. And the evaluation is, sometimes it doesn't come out of draft ever. It just the drafts go on for so long that everyone forgets that they've got to sign it off. So you have this, probably a PDF report. Sometimes organizations don't have a standard way of even carrying out evaluations, but usually it just sits in the file of the program team that ran the program and doesn't even necessarily get shared at the organizational level, or certainly not synthesized and the important learning pulled out. That's not always. I think many organizations are working hard to improve that. But one of the things that is the real sort of dream of many of us is to see people sharing evaluations. So we did this program in the Niger Delta, and this is what happened, and just share the evaluation. So we'd love to see more ICT for D and M for D projects sharing the evaluations as much as they can, so that organizations like SIMlab can do things like take a bunch of evaluations about a similar thing, a similar response, a similar type of program, or a similar region, and synthesize them to turn them into actionable knowledge that's maybe a little anonymized, but still very easy for someone to read a 2-pager or a 6-pager and say, okay, these are the big things I need to know about implementing this kind of program in the Niger Delta.
All of those are so huge, juicy topics. I wish that we had 3 hours to talk about them. But you're sitting in D.C., I assume. Maybe you're sitting in Kenya. I don't know. The decision is taken at Frontline back in November to spin off. What was the moment where you raised your hand and said, I want this opportunity. This is where I want to go. And, you didn't make the decision to start your own consulting company or, go work for another firm or, whatever. You made the decision to stay around and say, hey, this spinoff sounds awesome. Take us through that thought process.
Well, it actually evolved quite naturally. So you guys have all met Sean McDonald. He's actually my husband, for full disclosure. I know, it's awesome. We'd been working at Frontline for, as everyone knew it, for about 4 or 5 years. And it became obvious that what we really wanted to do was see if Frontline could get investment or see if it could bootstrap its way to, bootstrapping being, spending the income that you get from selling your projects and services to keep going long enough to get more income and hope that everything goes up and to the right, as they say, and your income increases and you can build a successful company that way. So we decided we wanted to do that, but the best way to do that was not to have it tied to a non-profit, because if they did decide to go down the investment route, you can't do that in a non-profit, really. So that meant setting up a completely new entity, and by that time, we had launched our cloud platform, Frontline Cloud. That was really the point at which the handover happened between Sean and I, between me running the software team and him running the software team. So we kind of switched desks halfway through as the sort of business development stuff turned into project implementation, which is more my field, and the software development stuff turned into business development, which is more Sean's thing. So then it was very natural for him to just keep running Frontline. And so he spun it out into the new sort of Frontline social enterprise. And I'm still running the same projects within SIMlab. We've got almost a completely new team. Most of our team started at the beginning of last year. Proud to say that I think we're over 70% female now, including the board. Not sure why. It wasn't deliberate, but here we all are.
Hey, that's fantastic.
And I check with the boys and they don't mind. And I check with the girls and they don't mind either. So it's been actually quite a natural thing. But what wasn't certain was whether SIMlab would maintain a role in SIMlab and in Frontline. And we actually felt that it was easier for us to be platform agnostic, and so to do our work free of any sort of interest in Frontline. And so we took the decision for the foundation to completely sell or spin out Frontline, and we have, I think there's a small sort of notional share interest in there, but basically we wanted to be able to take the knowledge that we had from running that wonderful project for so long and employ it more broadly to not just SMS but radio and all that other stuff and lots of platforms and not just Frontline.
What do you think after this year the next 2 or 3 years are going to look like? Do you have any notion of what that looks like, or is it too early in the process?
Yeah, I mean, we're in April of our year of Thinking Dangerously. So the next plan is to have a big retreat, all of this big, there's only 6 of us, but we're all going to come together in DC with our amazing board. SIMlab has a wonderful board.
Well, so just tell us that. So you said we're all going to come together in DC. Where are all these people?
So some of us are in Kenya. So we're implementing a program for the UK government's Department for International Development, testing some different approaches to rolling out mobile money programs in small schools and small and medium-sized enterprises there. We have one person in Brooklyn. Our operations and finance director is in London. So we're not all in DC. There's only 3 of us or 4 of us in DC at any one time. And our board are everywhere from Tanzania to Stanford. So we're going to bring everybody together. And the next step for me is really to review where we are. I think that there is a need for someone to be sort of independently looking at and helping people and looking to bring these lessons together and create these connections across sectors. So I think the experiment will continue. What that looks like exactly, I think remains to be seen. Just the space.
Tell us about, I'm trying to think of a way to ask this question, but what's been the biggest challenge in this process for you? Has it been telling the story about the organization splitting apart? Is it reinventing what SIMlab is? Is it talking to your existing donors and saying, hey, you've been giving us money for this, but here's another thing? What's your biggest challenge in this process?
I think that I've spent an extraordinary amount of this year just trying to, because we have people in multiple countries, we had a lot of, legal entities set up to do various different things. And so we had a relatively high level of complexity on the financial front. And at the same time, after the split, after the Frontline spun out, we found ourselves without a finance person. So I've ended up doing a lot of that stuff, which has been very good in terms of, for my peace of mind, we're in a very organized place. But that actually has taken up a lot of my brain space. In comparison, going around and saying, listen, this is the experiment that we're working on now. Our donors, in particular, I want to shout out the Hewlett Foundation and the OSF, the Open Society Foundations, for being very supportive of our new direction and seeing it as absolutely critical, particularly the M&E stuff. I think everybody, monitoring and evaluation, I think everybody sees that as a need. So that's actually been comparatively simple, which tells me that we're on the right track.
So speaking of tracks, I want to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about you and your career. You didn't start out working for Frontline SMS. How did you get here? Did you always intend on, being in the NGO/development community, or did you stumble here like most of us?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, I think I was a little undirected. In my teens, I didn't really have like a dream that I was trying to fulfill. So, and I was always told growing up a law degree was a really good thing to have because you could go and do anything if you had a law degree. So I went and did a law degree. And I was good at languages, so I did law with French and German and focused on the German, which now working in development was not the best plan.
That's a highly useful language, I understand.
In development, there are really not many people that you want to talk to in German. But so I did that. And then I was going to go into sort of City of London legal practice as a trainee solicitor with one of the very big firms and had my training contract all set up and just thought, it's not interesting. I just don't want to do this. I just don't want to spend all these years working on this stuff, even though it would have been, a nice job. So while I was thinking about what I wanted to do, I had really enjoyed the module that I had done on human rights and civil liberties in my law course. So I decided to go and do some more study in that field. And I had to, at the time I was living in the Midlands of England, and within reach, there were 3 universities that I could have managed. And I got offers from both Nottingham, which was more of a civil liberties kind of domestic degree, and Warwick, which was an international development law and human rights degree. And Warwick, it's the oldest of the new universities, which is a weird thing to say, but many of our universities...
I have no idea what that means.
Hundreds of years old. Warwick actually was set up in the 60s, and at the time was quite a radical left-wing kind of place. Now, the law school at Warwick is now a captain of industry in terms of turning out sort of corporate lawyers. But there's still this radical lefty sort of international social justice bit. And I really soaked it up. I loved it. So after that, I was temping, as you do, and looking for a role. And I was lucky enough to be offered a position as a part-time PA to the head of humanitarian policy in the international department at British Red Cross. And I worked there. I think I was part-time for about 6 weeks, and then the person who had the other part-time role left, and so I went full-time. And I worked there for 3 years, and there are still so many days when I think back to that experience to think about what I should do in a given setting, or with a particular partner, or in a governance thing that I'm working on for us, or I draw on that experience and the people that I worked with there all the time. And I left there directly for Frontline SMS, so in 2010.
Fantastic. And you never look back. This is where you want to be.
Well, I mean, it was interesting because 2010, of course, was the Haiti earthquake. And so we were exploring, the Red Cross was exploring using text messaging in the early days, particularly as thoughts start to turn from relief, which is the initial phase, to the recovery phase of the response. And they did end up using SMS quite a bit. So I started looking into all of this and happened to see on Twitter that Ken was looking for someone to come and be a project manager for him in London. And so I sent him my CV, and he he came and interviewed me in a pub, as you do at lunchtime,
as it should be, of course.
And I accepted a position with him, I think, the following day.
But you just described something that we talk about so often in this sector, in essentially any professional settings, but especially in the development and aid world, where you were in the right place at the right time. You answered with the appropriate technology, and that got noticed, and that's how you ended up where you are. There was no way you could have planned that interaction.
No.
It was all serendipity. But you were also you were prepared for it. You were looking, and you were there, so you were able to strike when it presented itself.
Yeah, and I think one of the things when I talk to some of my friends. So I'm in my mid-30s now, really, really old. And we're not all I have been incredibly lucky. And so when I talk to some of my friends, one of the things that I think really helped me was actually putting some effort into my online brand, which sounds terrible. But I made sure that I had a Twitter handle that people would recognize as being me, that I was tweeting about and following debates and discussions that I thought I was interested in. And I had a URL attached to that Twitter handle that went somewhere and told people who I was. And when I wrote to Ken, he may not remember this, but when I wrote to Ken with my CV, he DM'd me back. I emailed him, but he DM'd me back to say, oh, it's really nice to hear from someone that I know from Twitter. And I thought, wow, Ken Banks knows me from Twitter. That's amazing.
Wow, he was a follower.
He was, and I had 300 at the time. I was baby Twitter then. So that Frontline, thanks to Frontline, it was really astonishing how famous on Twitter being with Frontline makes you to me at the time. But yes, it was really critical, I think, to be it's like they say, dress for what the job you want. I think you have to also brand yourself as being interested, engaged, and knowledgeable about the things you care about, and that will help you if you happen to be looking for a role in a tech-forward field. It will help you get where you want to go.
A couple more questions. Tell us about a time when, either at Frontline SMS or in this evolution process right now that you are going through. I smile when you were telling us about, your head was in essentially the financial books for the past 4 or 5 months, because I feel like that is an experience that so few of us want to admit when you start out in a new small organization, that the realities of the day end up trumping some of those pie-in-the-sky things that we like to do. But either with Frontline or now in this evolution, what makes you tear your hair out? Has there been a particular time when you thought, oh gosh, the bottom just dropped out, the run is over, I'm going to have to go find a real job? Is there one of those stories that you're willing to tell us?
I think that's just...
or is that every day?
It's every day. We're essentially, the quote that I actually like, which will date me horrendously, is from Jurassic Park, of all things. So Samuel L. Jackson at one point says something like, we have all the problems of a major theme park and a major zoo, and the computers aren't even working yet. That's how we felt. We were like an older startup, an older foundation rather, with all the non-profit reporting that goes along with it, but kind of running ourselves like a bit of a tech startup with all the investment in the tech team that implies, and trying to set up a consulting business at the same time. So, there was a lot in the air, a lot of plates to juggle, and I think it was hard on everybody. At the same time, I think it's, I think if you like problem solving, then good. So that happens a lot. But I would say the really frustrating things for me as a small business trying to do good stuff, is actually the intersection between what we do anytime it butts up against the machine that is international development contracting. When you suddenly realize that they need a type of audit that you would never have had because you're too small to need it, or they need you to register in this massively long and time-consuming process when maybe you have one operations person on your team and they're already completely busy. And then, guess who has to do that? So you have to watch one of your team members spend time they should be spending on the work, doing all this sort of stuff. So and then sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes those contracts don't come through, or something goes wrong, or you just can't do the thing that particular donor wants you to do, it's really hard. And I think, therefore, working through partners who understand what it is to work with a small organization with the phrase is no core funding, then if you can have an understanding partner who will shield you from that, that's great.
We have a quote that we keep on our desk that is prescient, and I wanted to share it with you as well, and it's by Pablo Picasso, and he said, "Computers are useless. They only give you answers."
Yes.
I love that. I love pondering on that every now and then. The last question is one that I ask every guest here on the Terms of Reference podcast, and that's simply, many of our listeners are interested in jumping into the aid business. It's growing. This is a growth industry, or people are interested in transitioning into this business. You've had a pretty nice run over the last 10 years here. What would be one or two critical pieces of advice for creating sustainability, creating satisfaction in this rather complex and fickle industry?
Personally, or as a company?
Personally.
It is definitely a marathon and not a sprint, I would say. And at some point, you'll wake up and realize that you aren't 28 anymore, and bouncing off a red eye to Kenya and going straight into a full week at the office is going to end up with you not being particularly productive or happy or healthy. And so I think, having that balance feels selfish when you work in the stuff that we do, because you feel like you should just keep going because people need stuff and this has to happen, and everybody's margins are thin and everyone's trying really hard. But you also have to recognize that, certainly for SIMlab, our most important asset are our people. And I'm intensely proud of our team, and I think any of them would tell you how hot I am on, have you taken your annual leave? You need to take some holiday. Why are you here? Go home. Because I think it's really, really important to pace yourself and not burn out, either trying to meet needs that you can't meet or just working really hard. And, a person who has a healthy life outside of work is a better person in work. I think it's absolutely fine to take that space working in aid and development, and desirable.
Laura, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and telling all your stories.
Well, thanks so much for the invite. This was really fun.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.